Controlling these thoughts will make anxiety disappear as if it never existed. At first, that sounds almost impossible. Anxiety feels physical, immediate, overwhelming. It tightens your chest before anything happens. It accelerates your mind before there is real danger. It convinces you that something is about to collapse, even when nothing has actually occurred. But look carefully. Anxiety does not begin in events, it begins in interpretation. It begins in the thought that says, "This might go wrong." It begins in the assumption that uncertainty equals threat. It begins in the silent belief that you must control what has not yet happened. Your body reacts to images created by your own mind. Your heart responds to scenarios that exist only in projection. You suffer in advance for outcomes that may never materialize. And because the thought is repeated, the reaction becomes familiar enough to feel inevitable. The Stoics understood something deeply practical. You are not disturbed by things themselves, but by the judgments you make about them. Anxiety feels powerful because the thoughts behind it are unexamined. They move quickly. They appear urgent. They present themselves as facts. But they are not facts. They are interpretations. When you begin to examine them, something changes. The urgency softens. The narrative slows. You start to see the structure behind the emotion. You notice that anxiety is not an external force attacking you. It is a response built on specific mental habits. This is not about suppressing fear. It is about understanding its architecture. Because when you control the thought pattern, the emotional intensity loses foundation. Anxiety does not need to be fought. It needs to be understood. The illusion of urgency. Anxiety rarely whispers. It rushes. It tells you this must be solved now. This cannot wait. This uncertainty is dangerous. Your mind creates invisible deadlines for problems that are not yet real. Everything feels immediate. Everything feels critical. Notice how this works. A message is unanswered and your thoughts accelerate. A decision is pending and your body tightens. A possibility appears and your mind treats it as an emergency. There is no fire, yet your nervous system behaves as if something is burning. The illusion of urgency is one of anxiety's strongest tools. It convinces you that delay equals danger, that uncertainty equals collapse, that if you do not mentally resolve every possibility right now, you will be unprepared. But most of what your mind classifies as urgent is not present reality. It is imagined consequence. It is the projection of discomfort into catastrophe. The Stoics were clear about this distinction. What is happening now is often neutral. The panic comes from the interpretation that something intolerable is about to unfold. When you slow down and ask a simple question, is this truly urgent or does it only feel urgent? The intensity begins to shift. Many thoughts lose force when examined calmly. The pressure decreases when you refuse to accept internal alarms without investigation. This does not make you careless, it makes you precise. Real urgency exists, but false urgency is what keeps anxiety alive. When every possibility is treated as immediate threat, your system remains in constant tension. The discipline here is subtle. Pause. Separate sensation from fact. Allow the body to calm before the mind continues the narrative. In that pause, you reclaim authority. Catastrophic projection. Anxiety does not predict. It dramatizes. A small uncertainty appears and the mind expands it into a complete scenario. One possibility becomes the worst possibility. A minor setback becomes permanent failure. A delayed response becomes rejection. The future is no longer neutral. It is rewritten as disaster. This happens quickly. So quickly that you mistake imagination for foresight. You tell yourself you are preparing for what might happen. In truth, you are rehearsing catastrophe. You mentally travel forward, construct a negative ending, and then react to it as if it were already unfolding. The body does not wait for confirmation. It responds to the image. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, breathing shortens. You are now physiologically reacting to a story, not to a fact. The Stoics understood that future events are neutral until judgment assigns meaning. The event has not occurred. Yet your interpretation has already declared it threatening. You have suffered without evidence. Catastrophic projection thrives on one silent assumption. If I imagine the worst, I will be safer. But this habit does not protect you. It exhausts you. It conditions your nervous system to expect danger and uncertainty. When you interrupt this pattern, you do not replace it with blind optimism. You replace it with proportional thinking. Instead of asking, "What is the worst that could happen?" you ask, "What is most likely?" And if difficulty arises, what would depend on me in that moment? That shift changes the scale. The imagined disaster shrinks into possibility. The mind stops jumping to conclusions and begins evaluating realistically. Fear loses exaggeration. Perspective returns. Anxiety weakens when projection is exposed. But another error often follows. Even if you stop dramatizing the future, you may still be carrying more responsibility than is actually yours. The control expansion error. Anxiety grows when your sense of responsibility expands beyond its rightful limits. You begin to feel accountable not only for your actions, but for the reactions of others. Not only for your preparation, but for the final outcome. Not only for your choices, but for how events unfold in their entirety. This is the control expansion error. You try to manage how someone will respond. You try to predict the exact timing of results. You try to guarantee certainty in situations that are, by nature, uncertain. And when reality refuses to cooperate, tension rises. Because you believe something has escaped your control that should not have. The Stoics drew a sharp line between what depends on you and what does not. Your judgments, your intentions, your conduct, those belong to you. The response of others, the final outcome, the external chain of events, those do not. When you blur that line, anxiety intensifies. Because you are attempting to stabilize a world that is not designed to be fully stabilized. You feel responsible for variables that were never yours to command. Shrinking control to its rightful size is not defeat. It is clarity. You are not powerless. You are precise. You focus on your preparation, your character, your response. You release the need to manage the rest. This reduces internal pressure immediately. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because you stop fighting it. You stop carrying outcomes as if they were your personal burden. When your responsibility becomes accurate, your mind becomes lighter. The exaggerated weight dissolves. You realize that much of your anxiety was born not from reality, but from an inflated sense of control. Separating event from interpretation. Anxiety feels as if it comes from what happens. A message arrives, a mistake occurs, a possibility emerges, and almost instantly, emotion follows. It seems automatic, inseparable, inevitable. But there is a step in between that most people never pause to examine. The event is one thing. Your interpretation is another. Someone does not respond. That is the event. The thought that says they are ignoring me on purpose, that I have done something wrong, that I am being rejected. That is interpretation. A presentation goes imperfectly. That is the event. The thought that says I have embarrassed myself permanently, that everyone thinks less of me now, that my credibility is damaged, that is interpretation. Anxiety is rarely triggered by raw facts. It is triggered by the meaning assigned to them. The Stoics trained themselves to label this distinction clearly. First, identify the fact in neutral language. Then identify the narrative added on top of it. When you do this deliberately, you begin to see how quickly your mind moves from observation to judgment. This separation is not denial, it is precision. You are not pretending nothing happened. You are refusing to allow the first interpretation to become absolute truth without examination. Try it. When anxiety rises, pause and ask, what actually happened and what story am I telling about it? Often the story is more intense than the fact. The interpretation carries more weight than the event. Once you see this clearly, something powerful occurs. You realize that while you cannot always control what happens, you can examine the meaning you assign to it. That examination is the beginning of freedom. The first thought breeds the second thought. When anxiety rises, it often feels involuntary. A thought appears suddenly. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if something bad happens? That first thought arrives without invitation. It is fast, instinctive, almost reflexive. The Stoics never denied this. The first impression is not chosen. It is the mind reacting to stimulus. The body may tense. The heart may accelerate. A surge of fear may pass through you. That is human. But there is a second moment, and that moment changes everything. After the first thought appears, there is a choice. You can examine it, or you can endorse it. You can question it, or you can accept it as truth. You can let it pass, or you can build upon it. That second movement is where escalation begins. Anxiety intensifies not because of the first thought, but because of the second thought that says this must be true. This is dangerous. I need to solve this now. When you assent to the first impression without examination, the emotion gains authority. Pause in that space. Ask yourself, is this thought a fact or a possibility? Is it proportional? Is it useful? That brief evaluation interrupts the automatic chain reaction. It does not eliminate the initial surge, but it prevents amplification. Over time, this practice reshapes identity. Instead of saying, I am anxious, you begin to say, I am observing an anxious thought. The emotion shifts from commander to signal, from identity to information. This separation restores internal authority. You are not the first impulse, you are the judge of it. You decide which thoughts deserve continuation and which do not. Emotional weather versus rational climate. Anxiety feels permanent when you mistake it for identity. A wave of fear rises and you think, this is who I am. I am anxious. I am unstable. I am overwhelmed. But what you are experiencing is not your essence. It is emotional weather. Weather changes. It intensifies, then fades. It appears without permission and leaves without announcement. Some days are calm, some are turbulent, yet the sky itself remains. The climate beneath the passing storm remains. The Stoics understood this distinction deeply. Emotions are movements of the mind and body. Character is the stable structure beneath them. If you identify with every emotional fluctuation, you become as unstable as the weather itself. But if you recognize that emotions pass through you rather than define you, stability begins to form. Anxiety may surge in a moment of uncertainty. It may tighten your chest before an important decision. But that surge is not the totality of who you are. It is a temporary response. When you observe it without immediate fusion, you step into a different role. You become the one who witnesses, not the one who is consumed. This shift reduces fear of the emotion itself. You stop fighting anxiety as if it were an enemy that must be eradicated. Instead, you allow it to pass while maintaining your rational climate. You choose your actions based on principle, not on passing intensity. The climate is built through repetition, through examining thoughts, through correcting exaggerated judgments, through practicing composure even when the internal weather is unstable. Over time, the storms lose force, not because they never appear, but because they no longer define direction. Stop negotiating with hypotheticals. Anxiety feeds on conversations that never take place. Debates that unfold entirely inside your head. You imagine what might happen, what you might say, what they might reply, and how it could escalate. You prepare for arguments that may never exist. You defend yourself against accusations that have not been made. This is negotiation with hypotheticals. Your mind constructs a scenario, then begins solving it as if it were real. The body reacts accordingly. Tension builds. Energy drains. By the time you return to the present moment, you are exhausted from fighting shadows. The Stoics would ask a direct question. Is this happening now? If the answer is no, then your effort is misplaced. Preparation belongs to real situations, not imaginary simulations. You cannot solve a future that is not formed. When you rehearse worst-case dialogues repeatedly, you condition your nervous system to expect conflict. You strengthen fear pathways without any external trigger. Anxiety becomes self-sustaining because the mind keeps supplying it with material. Interrupting this habit is not about suppressing thought. It is about redirecting attention. When you catch yourself negotiating with an imagined future, return to the only place where action exists. The present. What depends on you now? Often the answer is simple. Breathe. Continue your task. Act well when the moment truly arrives. This discipline preserves energy. Instead of spending it on fiction, you reserve it for reality. Instead of reacting to possibilities, you prepare through character and clarity. Accepting uncertainty without collapse. Anxiety seeks guarantees. It wants certainty before action. It wants reassurance before movement. It wants proof that nothing will go wrong. But life does not operate on guarantees. It operates on probabilities. And when you demand certainty from an uncertain world, tension becomes constant. Notice the pattern. You hesitate because you cannot predict the outcome. You feel uneasy because the future is unclear. You delay decisions because you want to eliminate risk entirely. Beneath all of this lies a belief. I can only be calm when I am certain. The Stoics confronted this directly. Certainty is not required for stability. What is required is readiness. Readiness to act well regardless of outcome. Readiness to adapt when plans shift. Readiness to accept what unfolds without losing composure. Uncertainty is not danger by default. It is simply absence of full information. When you interpret it as threat, anxiety intensifies. When you interpret it as normal condition of life, the pressure decreases. You cannot eliminate ambiguity. You can increase your tolerance for it. That tolerance grows each time you move forward without full assurance and discover that you remain capable. Each time you act despite incomplete clarity and realize that you can respond to whatever emerges. This is not reckless courage. It is disciplined acceptance. You do what depends on you. You prepare your mind, and you allow the future to reveal itself in its own time. As tolerance for uncertainty increases, anxiety loses one of its strongest foundations. But there is another habit that keeps the mind restless: the tendency to live mentally in times that do not exist. Limiting mental time travel. Anxiety rarely lives in the present. It lives ahead of you or behind you. It drags you into future catastrophes or pulls you back into past regrets. Your body stands here, but your mind travels elsewhere. And wherever it travels, tension follows. When you project yourself into the future, you imagine outcomes that are not yet formed. You attempt to solve problems that have not materialized. You experience fear for events that may never occur. When you revisit the past, you relive mistakes, replay conversations, and reopen situations that cannot be altered. This mental time travel fragments attention. It divides your energy between what was and what might be, leaving little stability in what is. The Stoics emphasized a disciplined return to the present judgment. Only this moment contains actionable choice. The past cannot be changed. The future cannot be acted upon directly. Only now allows response. Limiting mental time travel does not mean ignoring planning or reflection. It means refusing to dwell. You extract lessons from the past without reliving it. You prepare for the future without inhabiting it emotionally. Ask yourself, where is my attention right now? If it is not anchored to the present task, bring it back deliberately. Each return strengthens mental discipline. Each return reduces unnecessary escalation. Over time, this practice creates calm, because anxiety loses access to its preferred territory. Without exaggerated futures and recycled regrets, the mind becomes less crowded. Reason as emotional regulator. Anxiety feels irrational, yet it often disguises itself as logic. It presents arguments. It lists risks. It highlights uncertainties. It insists that vigilance is wisdom. And if you do not examine these arguments carefully, they begin to feel convincing. Reason, in the Stoic sense, is not the absence of emotion. It is the capacity to evaluate emotion. When fear arises, reason asks, is this proportionate? Is this supported by evidence? What is actually within my control here? These questions interrupt exaggeration without denying reality. When you allow emotion to speak without examination, it escalates unchecked. When you silence emotion entirely, it resurfaces later with greater intensity. The middle path is evaluation. Fear may contain information. It may signal preparation is needed, but it may also be amplifying what is small. Reason functions as calibration. It measures intensity against fact. It adjusts reaction according to principle rather than impulse. When you practice this consistently, you begin to notice a shift. Anxiety does not vanish instantly, but it loses dominance. It becomes input, not authority. This discipline builds confidence, not because fear disappears, but because you learn that you can think clearly even when fear is present. You can analyze before acting. You can respond deliberately rather than react automatically. The more you practice rational evaluation, the less intimidating anxiety becomes. You realize that many of its claims do not withstand scrutiny, and when thoughts are examined, their emotional charge often weakens. Yet one final layer remains. Anxiety thrives where avoidance dominates, and stability grows where discomfort is faced voluntarily. Practicing controlled exposure to discomfort. Anxiety strengthens when you avoid what makes you uncomfortable. Each time you retreat from a feared situation, the mind records it as confirmation that the threat was real. Avoidance feels like relief, but it quietly reinforces fragility. What you escape today becomes more intimidating tomorrow. The Stoics did not pursue discomfort recklessly, but they did not flee from it either. They understood that voluntary exposure to manageable difficulty builds resilience. When you face what you fear in measured ways, you gather evidence that you are capable. The imagined catastrophe rarely unfolds as expected. Controlled exposure is not about overwhelming yourself. It is about gradual engagement. If uncertainty makes you uneasy, act despite incomplete clarity. If conversation creates fear, speak honestly anyway. If waiting produces tension, allow the waiting without distraction. Each time you endure without collapse, anxiety loses credibility. This practice rewires perception. Discomfort is no longer interpreted as danger. It becomes training. The nervous system adapts. What once triggered intense reaction begins to feel manageable. Confidence grows not from guarantees, but from repeated proof of capability. Avoidance tells your mind you are fragile. Exposure tells your mind you are strong. The difference is decisive. Anxiety feeds on withdrawal. It weakens in the presence of steady engagement. Over time, you notice something subtle. The situations that once caused immediate tension now create only mild unease. The internal alarm becomes quieter. Not because life eliminated uncertainty, but because you no longer treat uncertainty as catastrophe. And when thoughts are examined, urgency is questioned, projections are corrected, control is resized, interpretation is clarified, impulses are paused, and discomfort is faced, something remarkable happens. Anxiety begins to lose its fuel. When anxiety loses its fuel, when you look back at what once felt overwhelming, you may notice something subtle. The situations have not disappeared. Uncertainty still exists. People remain unpredictable. Outcomes are never fully guaranteed. Yet your reaction is different. The urgency is softer. The catastrophic projections are quieter. The impulse to control everything has reduced. What changed was not the world. What changed was the structure of your thoughts. Anxiety does not vanish because life becomes safe. It fades because interpretation becomes disciplined. You no longer treat every uncertainty as threat. You no longer accept every first thought as truth. You no longer negotiate endlessly with hypothetical disasters. Instead, you examine. You separate fact from story. You shrink responsibility to what is truly yours. You return to the present when the mind tries to travel. You evaluate fear with reason. You face discomfort instead of fleeing from it. And slowly, almost quietly, the body follows the mind. Breathing steadies. Muscles relax more quickly. Decisions feel less rushed. You are not free from emotion, but you are no longer ruled by it. What remains is not dramatic euphoria, it is stability. A mind that does not escalate automatically. A perspective that does not inflate every unknown. A character that responds rather than reacts. You realize that anxiety was never an enemy to destroy. It was a pattern to understand. And once the pattern is seen clearly, it cannot dominate in the same way. This is the grounded strength the Stoics aimed for, not invulnerability, not emotional numbness, but clarity strong enough to withstand uncertainty without collapse. When thought becomes disciplined, anxiety loses its foundation, and what remains is a steadier inner authority, capable of meeting life as it unfolds, without trembling before it. Content complete.